So, we've actually reached the real penultimate episode of this season, and there is a lot of changes and a lot of stuff that we need to break down in this episode. So, hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga and I'm here to do my breakdown for My Hero Academia Vigilantes Season 1, Episode 12. And like I said, there are a bunch of massive changes that I wanted to break down for you in this video. So if you like this video and you want to see more content like this, subscribe to my YouTube channel, leave a like, and hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more videos like this. And without the way, let's dive right into the episode. And to start off, the episode is titled Goodbye to Dad, which takes its name from manga chapter 25, renamed from No Better Daddy, and the episode covers material from chapters 23, pages 14 to 21, chapters 24, 25, and chapters 26. And the episode starts off with Aizawa and Midnight talking about the situation and potentially having to cancel the concert, very much like in the manga, and that after the OP, Makoto and Midnight begin to discuss what to do next as we see an added scene, not in the manga, of a man trying to restore power to the area. And this is going to really be the start of the smaller changes that we're going to be getting in this episode as we build up to the more bigger changes that occur towards the end. And unfortunately, very much like in the manga, the heroes outside of Captain Celebrity, who is getting generators, can't help. But Koichi, a vigilante, comes in to help with Pop Step to hand her personal mic. And this sequence has a slight change from the manga to the anime. Because in the manga, the scene is different because Koichi actually comes out from the crowd with the microphone in the manga, but in the anime, he actually comes from the side of the building using his quirk as he flies up and falls and hits the ground instead. And along with this, there is also another small added detail when everyone is encouraging Pop Step to go out onto the stage and help manage the crowd. Makoto actually gives her an earpiece so that she can communicate any updates to Pop Step when she's on stage, which is not explicitly shown in the manga and more or less implied. But something that I really like what the anime is able to do better than the manga, due to the anime being an animation media, is how we transition from Pop Step walking on stage, looking at her from the back of her legs, as that transitions over to seeing Queen running away from Knuckle Duster from a similar angle. And this scene is very much like the manga, with Knuckle Duster getting called about his wife's condition worsening in a well-animated sequence of him swinging around the city and eventually catching up to Queen, very much like in the manga, with some added flourishes and some neat close-ups of Queen having a more panicked expression on her face, which is very unique to the anime and not seen in the manga, or at the very least from the angle that we see her at in the anime. And it's these small changes like this that really shows how well of an adaptation this season is going to be in comparison to what we're getting in the manga. Just showing that the reasoning why adaptations can and do work is because they're able, if willing to add smaller changes that make improvements on the source material. In a way, making this season of My Hero Academia Vigilantes not just a better representation of the manga, but a different one that you can consume, which gives them most likely more avenues to change things, as well as separating the anime from just being a direct adaptation of the manga, which is an issue that you can say that My Hero Academia proper has. But unfortunately, we're not going to be focusing on Queen for long, but we will be getting back to her soon enough. But we do then cut back to Pop, trying her best to do crowd work as she's able to get the crowd to be more organized and enjoy her impromptu concert with the help of her fans. And the anime has an original song that is not actually sung in the manga, which is actually having lyrics based off of the first time that Pop Step was saved by Koichi from drowning and became her hero, as the song also brings up mentions of a hoodie, confirming that this is a song based off Koichi, which is a nice touch to add to the episode due to the fact that the episode is going to be focused on not just the concert itself, but heroic acts. Sort of. We'll get back to Knuckle Duster. Also, another slight addition to the scene is how the feathers make reference to her singing being quote unquote bad, because canonically in the world of My Hero Academia Vigilantes, Pop Step is not the best singer, but is an amazing performer. However, this just really shows how it's sort of life unable to imitate fiction, due to the fact that most VAs in Japan are also very good singers. So you can't really have a character canonically being bad at singing being voiced in an anime where most of the voice actors are very good singers. So it's a fun thing that I like that the anime brought up, but it doesn't necessarily make sense for the context of what we're seeing and hearing. But speaking of characters that most likely can't sing within the story proper, we have Aizawa, where we have the scene of Aizawa trying to comfort Teruo, which is slightly in a different order from what we got in the manga due to the added song sequence being more explicit in the anime, but we still get to see Aizawa shooting away one of the bees as we transition over to the fight in Continuum with Queen and Knuckle Duster. And it's from here where we get Knuckle Duster cornering Queen, very much like in the manga. However, this sequence gets expanded upon more in the anime, where we get to see more in detail the bees injecting her with the trigger drug, as we also get to see how it takes a lot longer for her transformation to set in, as Knuckle Duster begins to talk and explain about how the bee user and his daughter's personalities are beginning to become separated with the more trigger drugs that gets injected into her. And this change leads into a flashback very much like in the manga, with also some very significant changes. For starters, we see that Knuckle Duster has the scars in the anime flashback, which shows this definitively happens after the incident that gave him those scars, which I won't spoil, but sticks with me on this. We also get the flashback slightly expanded upon. The reason why this is important is because in the manga, we never explicitly see his face because he's always in silhouette. So the manga has the actual timeline be a little bit more ambiguous versus what we get in the anime. We also get the flashback slightly expanded upon in the anime, and we also get a change for when the flashback actually happened. Because in the manga, the implication is that the flashback is taken over multiple different interactions, but in the anime, it's based off of the one interaction, which is done to emphasize the impact of her leaving immediately. However, this implies more when combined with the other flashback that we're getting later in this episode, that this would have been the final time he saw her, due to the fact that she meets up with Queen within this sequence of flashbacks, which only truly makes sense if these flashbacks are not connected versus in the anime where it's shown that they are more linear in this moment. And while this does not necessarily break the flashback itself, because the anime could still very much imply that these are very separate occasions and are happening at different moments of the timeline, it does make it a little bit more confusing with this. However, it doesn't necessarily ruin or break the story as a whole, and the fact that they're making changes at all really just shows how comfortable they are with the timeline and just willing to change things that would allow for the episode to flow better, which it does with this change. But even then, there are even more major changes that occurs when it comes to the anime adapts Queen zapping Knuckle Duster in the anime. Because in the manga, her attack was more of a traditional taser effect between her two fingers, but in the anime, they amplified the attack to have more lightning and electricity pouring out from her body and made the attack look a little bit more deadlier, and better explaining why her arm is as fried as it was in both the anime and the manga, which shows how the anime is unafraid to make the spectacle of this series of heroes and villains with quirks more profound in the anime than it was in the manga, which takes away a little bit more from the realism and groundedness of this series. However, it is My Hero Academia. You can only get so grounded, and relatively speaking, it is still grounded relative to the world that we have been depicted. But even then, there are still a lot more major changes made in the episode. Because here, a real big change from the anime versus the manga is actually the flashback that we get between Knuckle Duster and Giran. Because in the manga, this flashback actually starts off after Knuckle Duster revived himself and paralyzed his daughter with his stun gun. But in the anime, it actually begins after Knuckle Duster is shocked and falls to the ground as Queen is leaving. And the anime, very much like the manga, does break up this flashback into two parts. However, the manga doesn't animate the flashback in the manga for the second part, but the anime does. It implies that it is a direct continuation from the first flashback. And the flashback in the anime is also expanded upon and also had some massive changes from what we got in the manga. Because in the manga, Knuckle Duster actually just calls Giran over a bunny phone and asks for the tools that he needs, while in the anime, they are more in a shady bar as Knuckle Duster is having a drink and having a more casual conversation while also talking about business with Giran with their backs against each other. And I really like this change because it just shows how connected Knuckle Duster is to the underground dealings outside of Hero Society, and also just adds more to both his and Giran's character, showing that Giran is willing to work not just with villains, but also with vigilante or pro-hero adjacent characters. Also, the anime added a very disgusting yet cool scene of roaches approaching Knuckle Duster's body as we see Knuckle Duster beginning to react to the taser, showing that he is actually alive. But from there, we do cut over back to seeing the concert as well as the power being restored, where we see that the concert is very much well animated and performed, even in comparison to what we got in the manga. And while the performance is not exactly the same as the performance in the manga, due to the anime actually showing Mui moving a lot more when she was not supposed to because she injured her ankle, I'm fine with it, mainly because it looks amazing, so I'll ignore that inconsistency. However, I will give the anime credit for not completely diverting from what was in the manga, because the plan was for Pop Step to be behind Mui as well as Yu was supposed to sing while going back and forth behind Mui. And we do kind of see that play out in the anime, but not to the same extent as it was supposed to be as seen in the manga. But even with that small change, they do add a very fun and very nice sequence of the Tanuki who's actually in charge of the Naruhata sector of his specific department store chain, where in the manga, it's just this disembodied voice talking about the youth and the importance of catering to the youth, while in the anime, we actually see a pre-recorded video of him saying it, which is a very nice touch as we see the performance going off and having a fun time with everyone all around. And as we see everyone enjoying themselves at the concert, this is where Queen tries to arrive to the venue and try to cause havoc even in their very much destroyed state. However, Knuckle Duster does arrive, confirming that he did restart his heart to normal as the fight resumes. And this fight is similar to the manga, but is expanded upon more, showing how there's a lot more choreography in the fight of Queen using her electric powers more and kicking Knuckle Duster, while Knuckle Duster is shown avoiding the attacks and tries to defend himself more. And this expansion of the sequence really adds more weight to the fight, as we do eventually see Knuckle Duster landing 2 clean blows on Queen, which the final one actually being the taser / stun gun effect. And it's at this moment where we got the flashback that I mentioned earlier, where we see Tamao leaving her father, Knuckle Duster, as this was supposed to be the moment that she leaves and eventually meets Queen, as Knuckle Duster delivers the taser attack that shows off a lot more lightning in the anime versus what we got in the manga. So like I said, the change in the flashback that we saw earlier does not necessarily greatly impact this moment because the moment still lands as it should have, being impactful in showing Knuckle Duster has changed as a person since that incident and showing how far he's willing to go to try and save his daughter. But after that major attack, we do get Knuckle Duster allowing his daughter to quote-unquote die, to force the B&B user out of her body so he can remove the queen and use his makeshift bee pheromone bomb to kill off both queen and the other bees, very much like in the manga, but it was animated amazingly, with the explosion being just so beautiful and slightly expanded upon this scene, while also removing a lot more of the bees, since we see a lot more bees in the manga versus the anime, so that this scene can flow a lot better and the animators not having to worry about animating a whole bunch of bees flying around. And it is here where we get that flashback that I brought up when it came to Giran and Knuckle Duster, talking about how they're going to use this stun gun to also basically be a defibrillator as a way to both start the heart, which technically is not what a defibrillator does. But we also do see Knuckle Duster giving CPR, which is expanded upon more in the anime, as well as a cut scene of him giving his daughter mouth to mouth, which does not make sense and is an outdated method in this situation, which overall makes the situation more palatable for me as someone who has a better understanding of how this stuff is supposed to work. But also, this change is also great because it allows for there to be a lot more focus on Knuckle Duster doing the CPR, which adds to the idea that he was probably a former hero or has proper training in medicine and medical intervention. But also the focus just really shows how much effort he's putting in to trying to actually and legitimately save his daughter and for her to not actually die. But it's here where we actually reach the end of the episode, with Aizawa allowing for Totoro to listen in on the end of the concert, as we see that the anime pretty much ends the concert very much like how it does in the manga, as well as we see Tsukachi confronting Aizawa and gathering information about whether the individual is actually an instant villain, as well as showing and sharing information about the bees being involved in all of these incidents. And as the episode properly ends with a mysterious individual with a scar across his face, no different than the scar that we see with Knuckle Duster using his quirk to recover the flying bee in the area as he walks away like nothing happened. Which is very interesting for two reasons. One, this was supposed to be his first proper introduction and his first appearance as the main recurring antagonist of this series, but we actually get to see him prior, not necessarily just in the opening, but within the first few episodes, as he was one of the individuals also giving out trigger drugs. But also what is very cool for those who actually know what's coming up next in the series is that when he uses his quirk, if you time it, it takes approximately 6 seconds between activation and end of his quirk, which the number 6 is going to be very important to this character moving forward, so keep that in mind. But yeah, that's pretty much the end of this episode breakdown. I'm gonna be honest, this is probably the best episode of the season so far. Story-wise, emotional-wise, animation-wise, greatness, all 3 categories. And they did make a lot of changes that I'm actually kind of happy that they did, because it really separates the anime from the manga, where you have 2 different mediums where you can get 2 different experiences from. But hey, that's just my thoughts and opinions. And let me ask you this, how did you feel about the episode? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? And was there anything that I missed from the episode? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!